I'm not a fag. I'm a werewolf.
Your whole family was 6.
Can we talk about the word dyke a little?
And called me a hot and tranny mess.
No, they're just you. Queer?
Hi, I'm Mo. I'm a bisexual man, and my pronouns are he, him.
Hi, my name is Percy. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as a dyke.
I was interested in investigating the use and reclamation of queer slurs in the queer community based on my own engagement with slurs. As a bisexual man, I feel like I can sometimes fall into this liminal space when it comes to the use of certain queer slurs, because in the back of my head, there's like this internalized social anxiety about using a slur when I'm not fully gay, whatever that means. But as one of my friends has pointed out and said, if I get called a slur by a bigot and I tell them that actually, no, I'm bisexual, that doesn't apply to me, that doesn't matter to them. They're still gonna call me a fag.
A lot of people would call me a lesbian, but that word has never felt good for me, because as a non-binary person, lesbian is intrinsically tied to womanhood, and as someone who is not a woman, but is female presenting in my day-to-day life, I feel like my ownership over the word dyke not only connects me with previous like icons of queer culture, but it also solidifies comfort in my own gender identity.
I feel like a lot of how I engage with slurs is in a comedic way. If I'm with some of my very close queer friends, I would use them in a way that sort of parodies the expectations that are put upon slurs by society, like how you would expect them to be used, but I would just use them in a way that's absurd and stupid and only makes sense if you're some kind of freak like me.
As someone who identifies as a slur, and I wanted to like reclaim the power that those words had over me, I was really interested to see not only how other people today within the community interact with slurs, but also how we got to this point. When did we start to take these words back? And so diving into this research has been very eye-opening and opening a lot of dialogues about usage of these words, which were once weaponized and are still continuously weaponized against us, and how we have taken them back and how we have made them our own. The LGBTQ plus community is no stranger to reclamation. From using the color lavender after it was taken from us in the lavender scare, and taking it back, to reclaiming the pink triangle that was used to mark homosexuals during the Holocaust. We have always been trying to take away the power that was used against us and make it into our own. That reclamation does not stop when it comes to our language. There are many oppressive slurs when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, with oppressive slurs being defined as any slur that can be plausibly used to cause some degree of oppression. From faggot to queer to tranny, we've heard it all. I've heard it all. And so we've set out on a mission to fight against that oppression. The movement to reclaim slurs like queer really set off in the mid to late 80s with the onslaught of the AIDS epidemic. Protesters rallied for change within Reagan's administration with the chant, not gay as in happy, but queer as in fuck you. It was with this cry that the community took the anger from homophobes and threw it back in their faces as our own, as their own. What was once the most vile word in the community was now the most unifying. Paul Burston, famous gay journalist and author, said of the use of the term, "Because queer is uncompromising. We're here, we're queer, get used to it." It was the battle cry of the 90s activist queer nation. Back then, I was an AIDS activist with ACT UP. It seemed natural that I become queer with, well, attitude. This unification was popularized with the publication of Teresa de Laurentiis's Queer Theory, Lesbian and Gay Sexuality in 1991. It introduced the term into the academic world and gave it a more pragmatic meaning than the oppressive meaning it held before. Now, the term queer is used as an umbrella term for anyone who does not identify as heterosexual or cisgender. Similar to how the African American community has reclaimed the term Black, this is an example of pride reclamation. Zuzana Jasinska talks about pride reclamation as when the slur in question is reclaimed to start objectively referring to an oppressed group instead of with ill intent. In the LGBTQ+ community, this has gone so far as to have the word queer included in the all-encompassing acronym. Jasinska also talks about insular reclamation, which is the reclamation of slurs in an effort to decrease the damage of the word. Faggot and dyke are both terms that have been insularly reclaimed, in some cases as far as legally. One of the most well-known instances in the queer community of this kind of reclamation is the 2003 to 2007 court case from the San Francisco Women's Motorcycle Contingent against the United States Patent and Trademark Office. If you've never heard of the group, you will probably recognize them for their more common name, Dykes on Bikes. The PTO initially rejected the motion to trademark Dykes on Bikes under Section 2A of the Lanham Act, which prevents trademarks that disparage a group of people. However, would a term disparage someone if it was coming from themselves? Vic Germany, lesbian and president of Dykes on Bikes at the time, said the rejection from the PTO felt like a hate letter. It was so harmful to deny their right of reclamation. Was the rule really that just? Eventually, in 2007, Dykes on Bikes was able to get that trademark they wanted. The group rejoiced. Sony Wolf, then secretary of the San Francisco Women's Motorcycle Contingent, said, "This is a great victory for dyke pride and visibility, not just for our group, but for lesbians across the country who value Dykes on Bikes as an affirmation of lesbian strength and resilience," in a press release. The reclamation does not stop there. Groups today are still finding solace and strength in what was once used against us. Take the band Dog Park Dissidents. Originally, in 2017, they released the single Queer as in Fuck You. In light of the Trump administration and the homophobia and transphobia that was brewing in the US as a result, they re-released the track in 2023 with their new album, the Pink and the Black album. The track finds the queer anger and rebellion that Milani writes about in his essay, the same anger that at the injustice faced by members of the LGBTQ+ community in the 1980s, and recontextualizes it for today. Not only is it inspired by the rallying cry of pride parades, but the album art reclaims the pink triangle and uses it as a message of strength. Just because these terms are being taken back does not mean they can no longer hold harm, however. In the Pragmatics of Slur, Rachel Bolinger points out that speaker intent is relevant when signal strength is weak. In the mouths of homophobes, use of the reclaimed term queer can still warrant deep offense. Those of us who use it jovially with friends or in reference to ourselves do so without the intent of harm. However, these words are still rooted in hatred. Faggot comes from when gay men were violently burned in rugs. Dyke comes from the origin of invalidating the femininity of lesbians. If used in that same intolerant way, the language will still hurt. We in the queer community reclaim them so we can lessen that hurt. We reclaim them to retain our strength. We conducted an online survey with 103 participants. Nico is going to talk about some of those results.
Looking at the age range that we got for people who participated in the survey, we got a wide range of people from the ages of 18 to 65, with the peak range of age being about 21 to 22, which makes sense given that I'm assuming many of our participants were college students within the survey. And looking at that, I really do wonder just how much the age range and like the ages of our participants would have played into, you know, who answered what as to how they viewed the use of slurs within the queer community against the queer community and like the reclamation of it as well. Because looking at our participants, we have almost an even split of people who acknowledge that a queer slur has been used against them. It's at 54.4 yes and 45.6 no, which I think is really interesting, just how wide that split is between people who have experienced the use of slurs and the people who haven't, because then it kind of splits up the way that perspectives can be seen as to whether or not they feel like a slur should be able to be reclaimed or shouldn't, based off like just your experience of it, you know, like whether or not you've been exposed to it, or if it's not quite something that's like new to you, but something that you haven't dealt with personally. So looking at the two questions that we have regarding whether or not people have used slurs in either a derogatory manner or a non-derogatory manner, it seems very interesting to me that the majority of people answered no, they have not used a slur in a non-derogatory manner, and the majority of our participants said that they have used a slur in a non-derogatory manner, but the two results don't overlap quite perfectly. It's not, you know, the exact same from one to the other, which I think is a very interesting way of looking at just how comfortable people might be with using a queer slur in general, given a history with it, or just like the knowledge of what a slur might do to a person, or just how an opinion might have formed based off of how they were exposed to it. Because we had 87 participants who answered that they have not used it in a derogatory manner, and 64 who answered that they have used it in a non-derogatory manner. So looking at our next question on the survey as to whether or not people could just name the number of queer slurs that they could think of, it seems very clear to me that there is a hotspot of the number of slurs that people could think of, with the highest number being 4, the second highest being 5, and then the third highest being 3. From there on, we have just a smattering of results ranging anywhere from 1 to 20 plus, which I think tells a lot about just the environments that people might have been raised in or interacted in with their friends and family, and just how slurs might have been more normalized for them, or in like a good way or a bad way, whether or not it be because they were raised in a household or just in an area that wasn't supportive. Our next question is whether or not people consider the word queer a slur, and I think that the results for this are very telling of just how our society has come to take a word that was once used as a slur, as just a hateful term, and start to reclaim it in the eyes of many people, because most of our results were for no, it is not a slur. And I feel like that has a lot to do with just the way that the queer community as a whole has started to take back this word that was used to, you know, oppress and to put down and to just spew hate, and have turned it into just a word that we use to identify ourselves.
To try and get a more complete understanding on how some of the people who responded to our survey felt about the use of queer slurs, we ended up conducting a series of 5 interviews. How would you describe your connection to the queer community?
I've just kind of really just gone with the flow of things. I guess identify as a bisexual man, and I mean, I don't really like putting labels on it. Like, I'm just attracted to whatever. If you happen to be a man, I'm like, hooray. I don't know. I've never really seen the point of just labels, since sexuality is just on a spectrum, and you're just, you know, attracted to whatever you're attracted to. So I feel like, I don't know. I guess there's no specific connection.
Well, I'm part of it, so that's the big one. But I guess in terms of the scale, I knew that I was a part of it since I was 15. In terms of like identity connection to it, that's definitely fluctuated quite a bit since then. But I've never had any hesitation of actually being a part of the community or like out or anything like that, at least to my friends or myself since then. So,
well, my identity first off, and then I've spent the last couple of years like working for my university as like a RA for the LGBTLC, and then as a member of the queer student leadership organization on campus. So doing things and being things.
What is your opinion on the use of queer slurs within the queer community?
I feel like reclaiming certain slurs, I mean, I know certain communities do that where they reclaim their slurs, and me personally, I don't feel comfortable, I guess, reclaiming slurs and stuff like that. However, if others want to use it, I'm not really like one to say the ones, people who are of the demographic, if they want to use the and reclaim their own slurs, I'm not going to like, be offended by it or anything. I'm just like, it's whatever. However, if it's, somebody else of that not of that community using it, that's where I find, problems with it because like, they don't have to face the struggles that we do as in the queer community. And it's just and it could also be seen as very derogatory, towards others and stuff.
I guess my opinion is that, yeah, it probably shouldn't happen. However, myself and like my friends used queer slurs and in like I don't know, I think it makes it like, it depends on the context and it depends on who's saying it. And it's like, shouldn't be said in a professional setting, shouldn't be said to people you don't know. But ultimately my circle uses queer slurs and knows that we probably shouldn't.
It's one of those things where, I would never say that like I'm 110% always okay with it because obviously there's a lot of nuance and context even within the community. But in general, not counting those weird exceptions sometimes, I think it's something that a lot of us use to either reclaim things that have been said to us or kind of a way to connect to history. For kind of more the latter aspect is how I kind of interact with queer slurs, of like a lot of them are just ways that like people proudly identified, decades ago back then. So it's like a nice connection to that part that we didn't really either get to be a part of or that is kind of like forgotten about.
Has your opinion on the use of queer slurs changed at all over the course of your life?
I feel like when I was like, 15 or something, like very newly in, I feel like one thing that I'm probably not the only person to maybe comment on is like the way that like, I guess just like queerness in general is talked about like in online spaces. I know for me, like I did have like queer friends, like whatever, in my high school. It wasn't like I was like the only one, but in terms of like finding community and finding information, like a lot of that came from like online spaces. And there was definitely a lot of discourse and discussion and stuff about like what can be used, what can't be used. So for like a 15-year-old who had like no connection to any like queer elders or like maybe like a handful of queer friends in real life, and then just this online community, like my access to like so much of like history and also just like my comfortability with myself as like someone who just kind of figured out like that I'm a part of it. I definitely did not feel comfortable using it. I wasn't sure like what was good, what was not good. People on the internet told me not to say it, so I didn't say it, and I kind of just like left it at that. But the more I became comfortable with myself, started interacting more with like queer people in real life, and like just like history, elders, and like more like just in general, just I feel like it's whenever you find more community, in whatever way that means to you, whether you are for or against something, that's kind of when you can more firmly establish your own opinion on certain things.
I guess, yes. I feel like it would have changed more if I really knew about queer identities when I was younger. I think from the time of like me learning about queer identities, but not yet, being out, not yet realizing my own identities, my opinion was a lot more like, oh, no one should say it. And then over time, it's been a lot more like, oh, I think it's fun to engage in with my friends in this way. I think it's fun to engage with myself in this way.
Have you ever used a queer slur? How?
I have. and I've used them in the context of like a joke. But also more recently, and this is some self-reflecting I've been doing. With my experiences working with young queer people, I've had some really negative ones that I directly attribute to their identities. Mostly with like young white queer people who don't recognize their whiteness and their other like dominant identities. They just like say like, I'm gay, and like think that excuses race. And that is something I've like have dealt with multiple times in the past couple of years. And so now when I say like, oh, I hate gay people, or I say like, oh, I hate a slur, I've been thinking about like, wow, I'm kind of like not joking anymore. So something that started with a joke is honestly kind of getting like a bit more real, and I'm trying to reel it in.
So I grew up in a household where very, very problematic beliefs and ideals where, you know, the use of slurs was very common in my household. You know, not just of the queer community, but of other communities as well. And it was just seen in our household as just a way of talking. Like it was, you know, we knew that it wasn't like a nice way to describe someone, but we didn't see the issues of using those slurs. And I used to use those slurs all the time, especially when talking with friends or family and stuff like that. Until this was probably fairly recently, I think like in high school, I was called out by one of my queer friends and was like, "Hey, you know, you can't really use those words," because at the time I didn't, you know, I was a straight man and or I thought I was straight.
I don't know if I need to list them. Honestly, I don't remember all the ones that I've used. My personal favorite, which is a fun word to say for talking about slurs, but like before when I say like I obviously I have like that like laundry list of like identities. The summary of like my identity when I like to say it quickly is just transsexual faggot, which you know. So in terms of that, like it's just not even like it's how I prefer identifying now. That's more of a recent thing, I think, in the past year for me. But I will, in terms of using it in general, aside from talking about myself, like I will obviously use it, as you know, with friends, but only with the context of knowing that they are comfortable with hearing it about themselves and or like using it in conversation, because I know such a wide range of people with different experiences about it. So if I meet someone for the first time, and I even know that they're queer, like my first jump is not to like start using slurs or anything. It's not like a regular part of my vocabulary in the terms of like I don't use them every day. I just know that that's how I like to identify with people that I've already had that conversation about, that it's cool to use it with them. I'll use it with them, but you know, you also it's not like every other sentence for me. It's just something that I am comfortable using when it comes up. But even things like I know like a lot of people like in terms of even saying like queer, I would never like use that for someone else if they haven't already used it for themselves or like things like that. So even the ones who don't, you know, the ones that are at least more widely used by more people, still kind of with that context, I'm pretty careful about keeping it keeping it within or like kind of in a ill bubble.
If you have used a queer slur with ill intent, would you still do so today?
You know, I really never understood, I guess, why people got offended with it until my friend explained it to me. I guess it opened my eyes. But yeah, it has most definitely changed over time. I don't think I've used any slurs at all I think after that moment, there's been a huge reduction of the use of certain words in my vocabulary and stuff similar to that.
I think like my relationship with queer slurs is like I'm not going to say a slur that's like that doesn't belong to like what to my identities. And so I think even when I say it with ill intent, I'm like placing myself in that group. And so even when it is ill intent, I'm not like calling someone a name. It's like a I hate group.
What was your first experience with a queer slur?
My first experience would probably have to be probably my grandparents. Now, when I was young, I used to I used to be into like really into WWE, and so would my cousins and stuff, and so we'd come over and do our own little WWE SmackDowns and just wrestle and whatever. And you know, I was staying at my grandparents' place at the time because my dad didn't have a home, but we we just we'd play around, we wrestle and stuff, and like my grandparents, throw out the F slur out there at us because we're two boys and we're wrestling and stuff, and so people would see it as like something inappropriate, um, and they would throw that out there, that slur and that word, and hearing it the first time, I was like, of course you don't know what words mean, and so I didn't click two and two together until then they start throwing out that like, oh, that's gay and blah 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 and stuff like that, and then I said piece I'm like, oh, okay, that me doing this is me being attracted to men, so doing that is inappropriate and stuff. And at that time, I thought that being a homosexual was wrong because that's what I was taught, and so I was just like, okay, that's not holy, let's not do that anymore. And that was probably one of my first experiences with, a queer slur.
And I think the first time was probably like my like dad's dad complaining about like gay people. But yeah, this was it. Oh my God. Okay. He loved the Big Bang Theory. Well, actually, he loved it, but before he loved it, he hated it because he thought that like the character Sheldon was supposed to be a gay man. And he was like, I don't understand why they put the F slurs on TV. And instead of everyone and anyone like correcting language, everyone was like, that character's not gay. And like that was the response, not like, because at that point he was old and too far gone. You can't teach old dog new tricks thing. But whenever anyone tells the story in my family, like the adults in my family, they repeat it with like the same language. And that experience, like, you didn't normalize it, but no one ever told me like when I was young that was a bad word. So I didn't know until like I was much older and experiencing like, like online, like queer communities myself, that I was like, wow, that's a slur.
The first few that I remember, because it all is a little blurry for me in terms of my own memory, would probably be, I would have to say like a tie between either like family members in passing or that kind of like playground kind of talkers, that kind of thing of like, it was just I can't think of like one specific like whatever, because I just remember like a lot of those terms being thrown around when I was growing up in a context that I just genuinely didn't really understand. My like growing up, like my parents just straight up like did not tell me about gay people, and I was raised very Catholic, and I was raised in like an entire extended family where no one talked about it. So literally the only connection that I had to like queer people for a decent amount of time when I was like at least very, very young was just like hearing these terms thrown around. I don't think I heard necessarily like any of the like more quote unquote intense slurs until I was maybe like in middle school, and then started to understand them a little bit more. But yeah, in terms of like any sort of like derogatory term, I would hear it thrown around and not really have context until later. So thankfully, it, at least growing up as a kid, it wasn't anything that was directed like necessarily at me. I just always heard like, I don't know what really that means, but I know that that's negative, and now I know that that is connected to that, and then it was just kind of that cycle.
Can you describe an environment or social setting in which you heard someone use a queer slur?
Yeah, I could give you a really recent one. So as you know, I was a part of a fraternity here on campus, and slurs would be thrown out fairly regularly, and it was like, I guess, very common to hear it in those settings and stuff. Like if I'd come over to watch a football game or something with the fraternity brothers, and let's say an ad came on that featured a gay man, maybe, or featured a gay man, a man in makeup or something like that. Of course, you'd hear like the F slur thrown out a bunch, um, and it was very kind of repulsive to hear that, especially coming from guys that were like, they meant it in a derogatory sense. There wasn't even like any justification, like, oh, I was just joking and blah blah blah. Like they meant it as like, a harmful word and stuff, and it made me very uncomfortable because at that time I had come to realize that I was, I guess we'll say, queer. Um, and so hearing that, I'd be like, oh, okay, so they don't accept this man that's on the TV. Why would they accept me? Of course, they didn't know my sexuality or anything. They just thought as me as another guy in the frat. But it kind of made me feel unwelcome, and unwelcome to this organization. And in turn, I did leave the fraternity for one of those reasons. Other reasons I won't get into, but that was one of the main reasons.
Well, the first thing I thought of was at a time I was in Com 101, and this was in my freshman year of college, and we were doing one of those like identity activities. And the professor, it was supposed to be like, a little bit deep. And so the professor was like, got to a question about, has anyone been called a like homophobic slur, such as the F slur? And there was this girl in my class who like turned her mic on without raising her hand, and then she said, well, I'm a woman, so I would be called the D slur, not the F slur. And she said it. And instead of correcting her, my professor like repeated it, and she's like, oh, okay, well, if anyone's been called a dyke. And it's like, the girl, my favorite part is that the girl didn't even turn her camera on, and me and two other people have their cameras on, and this girl made my teacher say a slur, and didn't even have that experience, wasn't even part of that. So that's like the first thing I think of is like, I guess like a classroom environment where like you're getting people from like backgrounds where they don't necessarily know. It happened a couple times when I was a Patriot leader as well. Like we were talking about identities and that sort of thing. And like someone would say, not necessarily a queer slur, they would say like something offensive. And then I would like talk to them aside and be like, hey, that is offensive. Did you know that? And a lot of times they don't know. So in places where there may be ignorance is where I think that queer slurs are said.
How did hearing that word impact you?
Discomfort. Discomfort. I find that I'm a lot more comfortable with like the person, like if I'm in a group of queer people, but if I'm with a group of straight people, like it's, or people who cis or straight people, like it's not comfortable, because then I feel like attention is turned to me and like maybe the few other queer people around.
He is a bisexual man, and he will throw out the term, some queer slurs, not fairly regularly, and only in settings with me and him, because we both know what words affect us in certain ways, and so there's a mutual understanding of like how we both use words and stuff. He knows I won't use them, but I'm not opposed to him using because he is a bisexual man, and so he will not like the terms. I know he's not going to use it in a derogatory manner, and if he's using it to describe something or whatever that nature, I'm not like gonna like I know he means no harm by it. Of course, now if he started saying it to people in a derogatory manner, that'd be a different story, I would not be okay with that. But it's just, usually in conversations, just me and him and stuff, or we'll be joking around or something like that, recalling past events where someone has called us certain words and stuff like that. But yeah.
In your opinion, who has the right to use these words?
The use of queer slurs should only be used by members of that community. Of course, there are like instances, like let's say in playwriting or movie scripts, where one would incorporate that because it is relevant to the plot and stuff. I'm not saying like, we can't, anybody who's not part of this community can't use this ever. Like, let's say an actor has to deliver a line. I'm not gonna, of course, because I'm an actor myself, I'm not gonna be like, you can't say it because that doesn't apply to you. But I feel mostly in a regular setting, queer slurs should only be used by queer people.
Very jokingly saying it in like as a joke, saying that it is in a derogative way, or like whatever way. Yeah, I don't think so. I just haven't. Yeah, this is a very tricky question for a lot of things. I feel like in general, and I'll like end up going on a tangent forever if I talk too long about it. But there's a lot of like infighting and policing within like queer spaces and like community things that of like who gets to go here, and I get to say whether you're queer enough to go to this gay bar or do this thing or go to Pride, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like that extends into terms and slurs a lot of saying, whether online or in person. I know that's something that's heavily debated. For me, as a just general rule, if you feel like, if you identify in the community, you feel like you want to, you're not doing it with any ill intent or towards, if you're not using it for harm, you feel like you're a part of the community. Even just right now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you can or cannot do. Even if you are a part of the community and you're using it with ill intent anyways, I'm still going to have a problem. So I think the best thing is just like intention. And that's a lot easier to like monitor or kind of watch out for than like, oh, I don't think you're really part of the community or part of the community enough. So at least from my perspective, if like I know someone and I know they're not a part of the community, that's a different story. But in general, I'm just, are you using it for harm? Are you not? We'll go from there.
I think slurs like belong to the groups that they're a part of. The only one, it gets tricky, I think. But as a general, I think, slurs should only be said by groups that like, by people who identify with those groups.
In an introduction to sociolinguistics, written by Janet Holmes and Nick Wilson, there's a part that talks about how people use language to construct their own identity. This section reads, "Examining the relationship between language and sexuality involves considering how people construct their sexual identity, as gay, heterosexual, lesbian, or bisexual, for instance. But it also involves considering how people use language to learn about sex, talk about sex and desire, and engage in sexual activities. By using this approach to language, I think that we can understand a little more about the difference between how someone like Ryan and someone like Dan engage with queer slurs."
From the 1980s until now, we are making waves in trying to take back the language that was once used against us. That trend has not stopped, and we are, in the community, a lot more conscientious of how we interact with these kinds of words. This will continue and continue, and it might change how we interact with them, but the one thing that is certain is we are here, we are queer, get used to it.